Hello there. I'm so excited to spend this Sunday fun day with Dax today. Hi Dax, how you doing?
And well, how's it going, Mello?
It's pretty good. I'm just so excited about 2025 and just the new possibilities. Um, and like creative new possibilities for creativity, right? And
Definitely.
and I feel like you're the perfect person to talk about being creative because that just embodies you. And so, for folks who are watching, I know I did the post the day before, but Dax is actually a physiology professor at a university in the southeast. Um, but even beyond that, Dax is also a great creative person. You do ecstatic dance, which I'm not sure if people know what that is, but maybe you can like mention that in a second. Um, and you also have some uh, really interesting hobbies. For example, psychoanalysis and tarot and astrology. And so I'm just really excited to, chat about these things with you and how you embody this multitudes of being this scientist and also uh, diving into this kind of like creative interest, right? So welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Mello. I think it's awesome that you put together uh, an opportunity for people to bring together all of these different facets of our lived experience and under that general theme of how we process information to make decisions, because I don't think it's always rational or logical or scientific. And I'm excited to explore that with you today.
Oh yeah, no, thank you. So I guess, I want to learn more about, can you tell us okay, how do you reconcile this like identities, multitudes of identities that you have where um you're a scientist and you always have to look at data and evidence, right? Um and then also have to explain to people that hey, I'm really interested as well in this other pursuits that sometimes people think, oh, psychoanalysis, that's not scientific, or tarot is not scientific. So, has anybody asked you like how you process like those kinds of information and not see like a fragmentation in your in yourself?
Um, until now, no. I
Oh,
think
I'm
most of
sorry.
the time I go into, there's different circles of people who are receptive to one or the other. Like I walk into a classroom and I teach physiology, and I walk into, a contemporary art museum and I'll do tarot readings. So it's like I go to the place and the people who are receptive to that particular mode of thinking, I adapt. So the chance to think about how these intertwine, I didn't really have an opportunity to until you posed the questions that you did and the invitation to uh, engage with you in this conversation. One of the themes that it came occurred to me as I was thinking through these overlapping interests of mine is free association. And this
Mm.
is actually just in response to your comment about psychoanalysis is often perceived as not very scientific. At the time that Sigmund Freud conceived of it, it was, early 1900s when he published Interpretation of Dreams. And at the time, he was studying to become a biologist. He was interested in neuroscience, but the method was to simply trace neurons. And he wanted to understand how the mind worked. So that method wasn't helping to address that question. And he wanted to develop a new method to answer it. And through the concept of free association, he felt that an interpretation of dreams that we could start to understand a little bit more about how we think, how we process information, how we make decisions, often unconsciously. And the in conceiving the idea of the unconscious, it's something that's always fascinated me because we, as scientists, as people who are trained to work with data, it's easy to come up with rationalizations after the fact. We're aware of cognitive biases, and yet we succumb to them all the time. And I think Freud's line of thinking with psychoanalysis really opens doors for us to have those conversations. And at the same time, uh, we still need to figure out like why is it that we're still biased, even with all the you know research on bias, all the research on implicit bias. Uh, People still are every day we're confronted with our own biases. We're making assumptions. So I think that that's just one area of interest of mine that I use to try and better understand that line of thinking.
Is there like how did you get started being interested in free association or anything that you touched upon?
Yeah, I think one of the things that opened the door for me was through dance. And so you mentioned
Really?
ecstatic dance. Before that, I did a contemporary improv class with Daria Kaufman while I was a graduate student at UC Berkeley. And in that class, it's contemporary improv is very much just moving, exploring like the limits of our body, like what are we physically capable of doing, trying to push those boundaries, notice our habits. Maybe there's certain movements that we'll do that we'll default to, even though we're improvising. And my instructor, Daria, noted that I was hesitating and when I was trying to initiate a different kind of movement. And I think that her observation of my hesitation was something that made me, I was like, wow, I hesitate all over the place. I hesitate in whether or not to finish my PhD. I hesitate in, it was that particular observation of how I moved and how I was embodying myself in dance that was actually a characteristic that I saw in other areas of my life. And uh, in exploring that and better understanding myself, psychoanalysis became an option for me. And I started to do psychoanalytic therapy while I was in graduate school. And since then, it's made me have a better appreciation for the ways in which we're conditioned to believe certain things and how we can challenge those assumptions as we are faced with new evidence.
Wow. Wow, that's really amazing. When you were talking about the dance class that you took and how you were hesitating, it just made me think about this your movements, your hesitating movements
Yes.
sound like they're somatic signatures of like your experience, whether it's like subconscious or conscious or not unconscious at all,
Yes.
unconscious at all. Um, and that's incredibly reflective. You know, because I think a lot of people they're just like, oh, I'm just not a good dancer, right?
Right.
Or they would just be like, maybe this is not the hobby for me. But
Mm-hmm.
to be like just fully look at the mirror and face it, ask the question head on, and sometimes you probably don't even know the answer because you haven't done that deep work internally to figure out like why was I hesitating, what is stopping me. um
Right.
I think that's like really deeply reflective. um yeah, so and also I don't know if people know what ecstatic dance is.
Oh,
um
yeah, sure. So it was through the dance community that in the Bay Area, I got connected with ecstatic dance. And what it is I would say its characteristic is that it's substance-free movement. And what I appreciate as a recovering alcoholic is that it's a place where people can convene in a collective and move. And usually there's a musical signature to ecstatic dance that takes you through a journey. So it starts off like kind of a warm up, and then there's like a hyperactive section, and then there's like a cool down you can think about. So each ecstatic dance usually has a musical journey that corresponds to it. And it's improvised movement. You can do anything you want from uh, pandiculating, so a word I learned this past
that
summer, which is like the kind of when you're stretching, like, like in the morning, if you first wake up, it's just usually you're moving in a way where your body is um, relieving some sort of pain point. that again,
Mhm.
you might not be consciously aware of like, oh, my shoulder kind of hurts, but then when you're stretching it, you feel a relief of pain in that area. So
Right? It's
it's
almost immediate, right? I mean,
yeah,
it's
yeah,
like you stretch it right there, and then almost immediately you would probably feel that release right away.
yeah. So I mean, ecstatic dance, usually like the pendiculation is considered an entry point for people who are uncomfortable doing, I don't know, like the barking or the crawling or other kinds of maybe more uh unnatural, not classical forms of movement. Um, and it's a great way for people, I think, who, especially people who feel insecure about movement or about their bodies, to get a little bit more connected with that.
Wow. And then I guess you mentioned that you were recovering um alcoholic. Can
Yeah,
you describe the process of that in terms of like the dance itself? Like how does that affect your like how you decide, okay, I'm gonna move my body today so that you can center yourself, if that makes sense?
absolutely. The So I think oftentimes dance in communal spaces is associated with alcohol use, and it's because
Mm.
we're uncomfortable. We're like maybe we're feeling socially awkward or judged, or and so alcohol alleviates a lot of social anxieties, and it plays a powerful role. And I'm not discrediting it for people who choose to consume it before they dance. As someone who I think I want to get a better sense of what I'm feeling and use dance as a way to explore that. My assumptions about, what are people thinking about me? Am I getting up in my head about judgments that are being made about how I'm moving, or um, even like sense of safety as like someone in a female body? Like how does There's a lot of different types of cultural associations with in terms of safety and vulnerability with dance and movement. So I think that there's a lot that people can explore. And what I've appreciated about the ecstatic dance community is a commitment to not just only substance-free reflection, like all the chemicals we need, we were producing ourselves, and we just need to activate that is basically a tenet. But another important part is the consent culture. There's not a lot of places where people talk about positive consent. Like sex education in the United States is not consistent. Every state has a different policy for public education. In Georgia, there's abstinence only education. So, conversations around consent and healthy boundary setting is another part of ecstatic dance. You can approach people, you can start to mirror someone. But usually, if you want to end a dance or if you prefer not to engage with someone for whatever reason, you can just make kind of a prayer movement, and that's a signal. Without talking, there's no talking allowed in the dance floor either. You're able to communicate and practice that type of healthy boundary setting too.
Wow. Yeah, as someone who have gone to a lot of dance floors, I actually never thought about
We got to go to a dance floor sometime.
yeah, yeah, for sure. Like I've never actually thought of like there is a lot of alcohol consumption usually with dance
Yes.
floors like raves and
Yep.
the
Yep.
club and things like that. And I have never actually thought of that. And so this is very like thought provoking. Thank you for bringing that up.
Oh,
But
totally.
I'm gonna keep thinking about it. But I've gone to an ecstatic dance, and I remember there was no like alcohol or anything, and I still enjoyed it so much, because it feels like a very welcoming environment. Um, and actually, this made me think you because you were um talking about, oh, like assumptions that you were thinking, or what do people think of me, and it also made me think about something you said earlier about biases, right?
Yes,
And I feel like somehow those are related. Yes,
definitely.
these are like negative thoughts, intrusive thoughts, right? Either like um what does someone think about me, or like people being biased, and I think these are kind of in the similar umbrellas. Um, and I just want to know, like, in your work as a scientist, as a professor, like, how do these also show up?
Hmm. Yeah, I think there's a lot of ways where science has striven to be unbiased, apolitical. And I would say with the rise of certain fields of thought that we recognize science isn't that way. Science is subject to all of the biases that every other field is subject to, and that we need to take more responsibility for the kinds of research questions we ask, the assumptions we're making about, especially if when we're working with human populations, about the how homogeneous a group is with a socially constructed label. I think that we recognize, oh, actually, transgender community is very heterogeneous, intersex very heterogeneous. But because they're the minority, it's easy for people to group it and to say, like, this is the average of this particular group
Mm.
compared to this other group. And so we are calling that type of methodology into question more. I think in education, we're trying to make sure that the groups that we're serving are represented in our data. And the other piece that is essential is having people from that community be a part of the research. So I think very intentionally about the composition of my research team. What expertise and lived experiences do the different student researchers I work with bring? And how can we tap into that expertise and make sure we have a climate where while there is a institutionally recognized hierarchy, like I'm the professor, students have way more experience in the lived experiences of students than I do. And so I want to make sure that they feel seen as experts in that and can contribute meaningfully to our interpretation of data, especially students who share similar backgrounds as them.
Wow. Wow, that's so important. It sounds like you're describing something more like non-hierarchical in
Yeah,
a very hierarchical place, right? Like
yeah,
institutions are
I
very hierarchical usually.
totally. And I don't think we can escape the hierarchy. I think that that's there. And what we can do is make space for contributions. And we have to be intentional about responding to the hierarchy rather than pretending it's not there.
Hmm. So what do you mean by that?
Yeah, I think there's certain ways that I've approached it, like creating opportunities for people to share anonymously, um, and also letting people know that, when I hear feedback or when I hear new ideas, I am mindful to try and say, oh, so and so had this idea, or this is so and so's work. And I think those are, important things for us to do in the spirit of implicit bias. We know about, how people from certain groups get interrupted more or have their ideas discounted or co-opted, and who's at the table, who's on the text thread. I think every single aspect of our day-to-day lived experience has been shaped by some sort of bias. And so being intentional about looking for that throughout our day, throughout our communications, is a way to respond to that uh, hierarchy in a way that, while it exists, we need to challenge it.
Wow. Wow, that's so powerful. Especially because, students sometimes they feel like they don't have this agency or power to even like share an idea without fear of, oh, this is not a great idea, that it will be shot down, or like not getting the credit for their original idea. So I think that's really wonderful that that you are intentionally like making sure that you do these things um to, I don't know if elevate is the right word, but just recognize students. And this recognition is something that you have been talking about this whole interview. Recognizing your own body, your
Hmm.
somatic signature. That's the phrase.
Yes, I love that phrase.
Recognizing like, oh, like how others potentially perceive you, and like figuring
Hmm.
out, okay, which is real and which is things I'm projecting that it's not real. Uh,
Exactly.
and also recognizing, okay, these actual students in your classroom, and recognize them in a different way, where like, whoa, you have a cool idea, and like everyone should know about it, and celebrating that. And that's beautiful. That's
Yeah.
really beautiful. And yeah, so I mean, we're at the end of our interview now, and is there anything else that you'd like to share, that's like that you want people to know about
Yeah.
you or anything you do?
Sure. Well, I'll just say, as an invitation for people who are interested in thinking about the way we process information and make decisions, some tools and strategies are doing like free association journaling. Uh, I think talking through ideas with other people is an important way of checking our biases and assumptions. And I think just have fun and exploring the biases that we have. I think that we often make ourselves wrong for having them, but we all have them. And uh, what are ways that we can challenge them? And when you find one, how can you celebrate it rather than criticize or shame yourself for it, to support our learning?
Yeah, and that's a key word there, the learning, right? Because it's not learning until like you start somewhere and then you end up in another place. Like that is literally what learning means. So,
I love that.
right? Yeah, if you feel like I don't know enough about this topic, or maybe I have a biased opinion about a certain topic, and the learning is like becoming more self-aware, and sounds like one of your tips is like talking with other people, educating yourself, right? It's
Definitely.
totally okay from start from point A and end up in point B or G. um and that's the whole premise of learning, because I'm sure 10 years ago we are like somewhat different people, right? And just being like a lifelong learner, not just of school stuff, but just of life wisdom and knowledge. I think it's something that everybody can, take away from this conversation. Just keep learning, and it's okay if you don't know something right now.
Here,
um
here.
yeah, thank you again.
You're welcome. Thank you. Bye, Mello.
Bye.